The office buzzed with the usual hum of keyboards clacking, phones ringing, and muted conversations. In the corner office, however, an entirely different atmosphere loomed. Mr. Donovan, the CEO of the company, sat behind his enormous oak desk, his piercing blue eyes fixed on the glass wall overlooking the workspace. His gaze wasn't on the numbers displayed on the projection screen or the performance charts neatly arranged in his inbox. It was on her. Cinderella Winters, a young, bright, and stunningly beautiful woman, had been working at the company for only a year, yet her diligence and charm had made her a standout. But her presence did more than just attract admiration. It kindled jealousy and desire in the heart of a man who was used to controlling everything and everyone around him. Donovan leaned back in his chair, his jaw tightening as he watched her laugh softly at something her colleague, Ethan, said. The sight sent a pang of irritation through him. Ethan, the confident and charismatic marketing manager, was the kind of man Donovan loathed: young, free-spirited, and seemingly oblivious to the power dynamics in the room. Donovan couldn't shake the feeling that Cinderella was slipping further away from his grasp every time she interacted with Ethan. Cinderella, on the other hand, was blissfully unaware of Donovan's obsessive gaze. She was focused on her work, her delicate features glowing with determination. She had come a long way from the small town she called home, determined to make a name for herself in the corporate world. Her intelligence and unyielding work ethic had quickly earned her respect among her peers, but it had also made her the target of Donovan's unhealthy fixation. Donovan's interest in Cinderella had started innocently enough, or so he told himself. She was talented, he thought, and deserved his mentorship. But as the months passed, his admiration warped into something darker. He began assigning her to projects that required late nights at the office, just so he could spend more time with her. He ensured that no one else in the company had the authority to manage her workload, claiming it was a matter of strategic importance. At first, Cinderella thought his attention was purely professional, albeit a little excessive. She was used to being underestimated as a woman in a competitive field, and Donovan's praise felt like recognition for her hard work. But soon, the compliments became personal, the boundaries blurred, and Cinderella began to feel a weight she couldn't quite define. One afternoon, as Cinderella sat at her desk reviewing a presentation, Donovan called her into his office. She straightened her blazer and walked in, her heels clicking against the polished floor. "You wanted to see me, Mr. Donovan?" she asked politely, standing just inside the door. Donovan gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. "Cinderella, please. Sit down." She hesitated but complied, her instincts telling her to stay on guard. Donovan leaned forward, his tone unusually soft. "You've been doing incredible work. Truly, you're one of the most talented employees I've had the pleasure of working with." "Thank you, Mr. Donovan," she replied, her voice steady but guarded. He paused, studying her face as if searching for something. "You know, Cinderella," he began, his voice dropping lower, "you have so much potential. Someone like you deserves to be guided by someone who understands their worth." Cinderella felt a prickle of unease. "I appreciate your guidance," so she said carefully, unsure of where this was heading. Donovan's lips curled into a smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I think we make an excellent team, and I'd like to discuss some special opportunities for you, perhaps over dinner sometime?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Cinderella's heart raced. This wasn't the first time Donovan had suggested a personal meeting outside the office, but she had always managed to deflect politely. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Donovan, but I have a lot on my plate right now. Maybe we can discuss it during work hours," she said, keeping her tone professional. For a brief moment, Donovan's expression darkened, but he quickly masked it with a tight smile. "Of course," he said smoothly. "We'll revisit this when the timing is better." As Cinderella left his office, she couldn't shake the feeling that she had just walked away from something dangerous. Donovan's gaze followed her until the door closed behind her, his mind already plotting his next move. Back at her desk, Cinderella tried to focus, but the unease lingered. Little did she know, Donovan's obsession was growing stronger by the day, and soon he would stop at nothing to have her under his control. Days turned into weeks, and Cinderella's unease about Mr. Donovan only deepened. While she continued to excel in her work, the boundaries he blurred became harder to ignore. From offhand comments about her appearance to accidental touches when handing her documents, his behavior left her walking on eggshells. Yet, she stayed professional, determined not to let his actions derail her ambitions. Donovan, however, was losing patience. He had always been a man who got what he wanted. Wealth, power, and control were his weapons, and no one had ever dared defy him for long. But Cinderella's polite deflections felt like tiny rebellions, stoking his desire and deepening his obsession. He convinced himself it wasn't just about attraction, he deserved her. In his mind, she belonged to him. One Friday evening, as the office began to empty out for the weekend, Donovan stood in his glass-walled office, watching Cinderella gather her things. She always worked late, her dedication unmatched by anyone else. It was one of the many qualities he admired about her, though admiration had long since morphed into fixation. Tonight, he decided, he would make his move. Cinderella, his voice rang out just as she was putting on her coat. She froze for a moment before turning to face him, her polite smile masking her irritation. "Yes, Mr. Donovan? Could you step into my office for a moment? There's something important I need to discuss before you leave." She glanced at the clock. It was nearly 7 p.m. Most of the office was already deserted. Hesitating for a second, she forced herself to nod. Of course, as she stepped into his office, Donovan closed the door behind her, a subtle but deliberate gesture that made her pulse quicken. He motioned for her to sit, but she remained standing. "What's this about?" she asked, her tone calm but cautious. Donovan leaned against his desk, his piercing gaze fixed on her. "You've been doing extraordinary work, Cinderella. I've decided to assign you to a new project, one that could elevate your career significantly." She raised an eyebrow, surprised. "What kind of project?" "It's highly confidential," he said, his tone dripping with importance. "Something that requires discretion and long hours. I need someone I can trust completely." Cinderella's instincts flared. The compliment felt less like praise and more like bait. "I'm honored, but I'd need to know more about the specifics before committing." Donovan's smile tightened. "Of course. We'll go over everything. In fact, I was thinking we could meet at my estate tomorrow evening. It'll be quieter and we can discuss things without interruptions." Her heart sank. She knew this wasn't about work. "I'm not sure that's appropriate, Mr. Donovan. Can't we discuss it here during business hours?" His expression darkened for just a moment before he masked it with a practiced smile. "I insist. This project could be a game changer for your career, and I need someone with your talent on board." Cinderella hesitated. She couldn't outright refuse without risking her job, but every fiber of her being screamed that this was wrong. "All right," she said finally, her voice steady despite her unease. "Tomorrow evening at IS." Donovan's smile widened. "Excellent. I'll send a car to pick you up at 7 p.m. sharp." The next evening, Cinderella found herself sitting in the back of a sleek black car, her stomach churning with anxiety. She had spent hours debating whether to cancel, but the risk of offending Donovan and potentially jeopardizing her career kept her from backing out. When the car pulled up to Donovan's sprawling estate, the grandeur of the place only heightened her nerves. The driver escorted her to the front door, where Donovan himself greeted her, his smile too wide to feel genuine. "Cinderella," he said warmly, ushering her inside. "I'm so glad you could make it." The house was enormous, with marble floors and walls adorned with expensive art. He led her to a private study, where a single table was set with wine and an elaborate dinner. It felt more like a date than a business meeting. But Cinderella kept her composure. She couldn't afford to show weakness. As they sat down, Donovan poured her a glass of wine. "Relax," he said, his tone almost playful. "You're far too tense. Let's enjoy the evening before we get to business." Cinderella declined the wine with a polite smile. "I'd prefer to discuss the project, Mr. Donovan. I have an early morning tomorrow." His expression flickered with irritation, but he quickly masked it. "Of course. Let's talk." But instead of discussing work, Donovan began steering the conversation toward personal topics: her background, her ambitions, her relationships. Every question felt like a trap designed to corner her. Cinderella answered vaguely, trying to keep the conversation professional, but the air grew heavier with every passing minute. Suddenly, Donovan stood, moving toward her chair. "You're extraordinary, Cinderella," he said, his voice low. "Do you know how rare it is to find someone like you?" She stiffened, her pulse racing. "Thank you, but I think we should stay focused on work." Donovan leaned closer, his hand resting on the back of her chair. "Why limit yourself to work when you could have so much more?" Cinderella stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I think I should leave," she said firmly. But Donovan blocked her path, his smile chilling. "You're not going anywhere," he said softly, locking the door behind him. Cinderella's heart pounded in her chest as she stared at the door Donovan had just locked. The metallic click echoed in the silent room, and for the first time, she truly understood the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just an uncomfortable dinner or an inappropriate advance. She was trapped, and the man standing before her was no longer hiding his intentions. Mr. Donovan, unlock the door, she demanded, her voice steadier than she felt. She took a step back, keeping the table between them like a barrier. This isn't appropriate, and I need to leave. Donovan's smile widened, but it lacked any warmth. Cinderella, he said softly, his tone almost condescending. You need to stop resisting what's inevitable. I've given you every opportunity to make this easy. Her blood ran cold. I'm not sure what you think is inevitable, but you're crossing a line. This isn't right. Donovan moved closer, his towering frame casting a shadow over her. I've watched you for months, he said, his voice low and calculating. You're special, Cinderella. You're not like the others. I know you feel it too, this connection we have. Cinderella shook her head, backing further away. You're mistaken, she said firmly. Whatever you think this is, it's not real. You're my boss, and that's the only connection we have. His face darkened, the thin veneer of charm slipping away. I've given you everything, he snapped, his voice rising. Opportunities, mentorship, protection, and this is how you repay me. By dismissing me like I'm nothing. I've worked hard for everything I've achieved. She shot back, anger flaring through her fear. You didn't give me anything I didn't earn. Donovan's jaw clenched, and for a moment she thought he might lash out. But instead, he exhaled sharply, regaining his composure. You're right, he said, his tone eerily calm. You're strong, independent, that's what drew me to you. But I can't let you walk away from this. Not now. He gestured toward a plush armchair near the fireplace. Sit, he ordered. We need to talk. Cinderella didn't move. Her eyes darted toward the locked door, then back to Donovan. She was calculating her options, searching for a way out, but he was blocking her only escape. I said, sit, Donovan repeated, his voice cold and commanding. Seeing no immediate alternative, Cinderella reluctantly complied, keeping her distance as much as possible. She needed to buy time to think. The room was large and ornate, but its grandeur offered no comfort. Every window was covered with heavy drapes, and the walls seemed to close in around her. Donovan sat across from her, his intense gaze never leaving her face. I know you don't understand this now, he began, his tone almost pleading. But I'm doing this for us. I want to take care of you, to build a life together. You're too focused on your career to see what's right in front of you. Cinderella clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms. You're delusional, she said, her voice shaking with controlled fury. Whatever fantasy you've created, it's not real. I don't feel anything for you, and I never will. His eyes narrowed, a dangerous glint flashing across them. You'll change your mind, he said simply, once you see what I can offer you. You'll understand. The weight of his words settled over her like a suffocating blanket. She needed to act fast. Her eyes flicked toward the table, where a heavy glass decanter of wine sat within reach. If she could distract him, even for a moment, she might have a chance to escape. Donovan leaned forward, his hands resting on his knees. You're making this harder than it needs to be, he said. I've planned everything. You won't have to worry about a thing. Just trust me, trust him. The thought made her stomach turn. Gritting her teeth, she forced herself to stay calm. I just need a little time, she said softly, lowering her gaze to hide the fire in her eyes. This is a lot to process. Donovan's expression softened, and for a moment, she saw the vulnerability beneath his facade. I knew you'd see reason, he said, a smug smile spreading across his face. We'll figure this out together, she nodded slowly, her mind racing. Can I have a glass of water, she asked, her voice trembling just enough to seem genuine. Donovan hesitated, then rose to his feet. Stay here, he ordered, pointing a finger at her like she was a child. I'll get it. As soon as he disappeared through the doorway, Cinderella sprang into action. She grabbed the glass decanter, her fingers trembling, and moved silently toward the door. Her pulse raced as she scanned the lock, searching for a way to force it open. Footsteps echoed in the hallway. He was coming back. Desperation surged through her as she swung the decanter against the lock with all her strength. The sound of shattering glass filled the room, but the lock held firm. Donovan's voice rang out, sharp and furious. What the hell are you doing? Cinderella spun around, her chest heaving, shards of glass scattered at her feet. Donovan stood in the doorway, his face a mask of rage. You just made the biggest mistake of your life, he growled, stepping toward her. But Cinderella didn't back down. For the first time, she felt a spark of defiance. We'll see about that, she said, her voice steady. You don't own me. Donovan's furious steps echoed through the mansion as he closed the distance between himself and Cinderella. Her heart raced, but her resolve held firm. She gripped the remains of the broken decanter tightly, its jagged edges glittering like shards of hope. If he thought he could intimidate her, he was wrong. "You've underestimated me," she said, her voice steady despite the storm of fear swirling inside her. "I won't let you control me." Donovan stopped a few feet away, his eyes narrowing as he studied her. For a moment, the arrogance in his expression faltered. "What do you think you're going to do with that?" he asked, motioning to the broken glass in her hand. "I'll do whatever it takes," she replied. "Unlock that door, or I'll make you regret it." His lips curled into a sneer, but she noticed the slight twitch in his jaw. "You won't," he said, though the confidence in his voice wavered. "You're not that kind of person. Try me," she shot back, tightening her grip. For a tense moment, the two of them stood locked in a silent battle of wills. Finally, Donovan stepped back, raising his hands as if in surrender. "Fine," he said, his tone dripping with mockery. "You've made your point. I'll unlock the door." Cinderella's heart leapt with hope, but she didn't lower her guard. She watched as he retrieved the key from his pocket and approached the door. He inserted it into the lock, turning it with an audible click. Then, with a sly smirk, he pulled the key back out and slipped it into his other pocket. "You see," he said, spinning to face her, "this is exactly why you need me. You think you're so strong, so independent, but you can't win against me. Not here." Cinderella's stomach sank as she realized he was toying with her. But she refused to let him see her despair. "Maybe not," she said, taking a cautious step back. "But I can still make you answer for what you've done." Donovan's smirk disappeared. "And how exactly are you going to do that?" "No one will believe you. This is my world, Cinderella, and I control it." The truth of his words stung, but she knew he was wrong. Somewhere out there, someone would help her. She just needed to find a way to reach them. "Your world is built on lies," she said, her voice calm and resolute. "And it's going to come crashing down." As she spoke, her mind raced through possible escape routes. The windows were sealed. The door was still locked, and Donovan was blocking her path. But she wasn't about to give up. If there was one thing she had learned in her life, it was that strength didn't come from muscles or power. It came from refusing to quit, even when the odds were stacked against you. Donovan's composure cracked further with every word Cinderella spoke. For the first time, she saw genuine fear flicker across his face. He wasn't used to being challenged, and it unnerved him. But instead of backing down, he doubled down on his arrogance. "You think you're so clever," he spat, his tone dripping with venom. "But you're just a little girl playing a game you don't understand." Cinderella didn't flinch. "And you're a coward hiding behind your wealth and power." The insult hit its mark, and Donovan's face twisted with rage. "Enough," he bellowed, slamming his fist against the table. The sound reverberated through the room, but Cinderella stood her ground. "I'll say it again," she said firmly. "Let me go." "You can't keep me here forever." Donovan laughed, the sound harsh and hollow. "Oh, but I can. No one knows you're here. No one will come looking for you." His words sent a chill down her spine, but she refused to let him see her fear. "You're wrong," she said. "Someone will notice. Someone always does." She wasn't lying. Earlier that day, she had sent a quick message to her colleague Ethan, mentioning that she was meeting Donovan at his estate to discuss a project. She hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now it felt like her lifeline. If she could just hold out long enough, Ethan might realize something was wrong and come looking for her. Meanwhile, Donovan's desperation grew. He paced the room, his mind racing for a way to regain control. Every move Cinderella made, every word she spoke, chipped away at his confidence. He had expected her to cower, to break under the weight of his authority. Instead, she was standing tall, defying him at every turn. "You've made this so much harder than it needed to be," he muttered, more to himself than to her. "I gave you everything, and this is how you repay me." "I didn't ask for anything from you," she replied. "You made this mess, and now you're going to face the consequences." Donovan froze, his eyes narrowing. "What consequences? Do you think anyone will believe you? I'll ruin you, Cinderella. You'll never work in this industry again." His threats were hollow, and they both knew it. Cinderella's strength was shaking the foundation of his carefully constructed facade, and he was running out of moves. All she had to do was hold her ground and wait for the cracks to widen. Outside, the faint sound of a car engine broke through the silence. Cinderella's heart skipped a beat. Could it be Ethan? Or was it someone else? She didn't dare show her excitement, but a flicker of hope ignited within her. Donovan didn't seem to notice. He was too caught up in his own unraveling, pacing back and forth like a caged animal. But Cinderella knew the tide was turning. The boss who had once seemed invincible was now teetering on the edge of his own downfall, and she was ready to push him over. Before we dive into this dramatic chapter, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a story like this. If you're as hooked as we are, drop a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and let us know what would you do if you were in Cinderella's shoes. The faint sound of a car engine outside sent a jolt of hope through Cinderella's veins. She kept her expression neutral, unwilling to let Donovan see the flicker of optimism in her eyes. She needed to buy time, just a few more minutes. "Is this really who you want to be?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with sadness. "A man who traps people and forces them to stay?" "You can still end this before it's too late." Donovan paused mid-stride, her words striking a chord he hadn't expected. But the moment passed quickly, and his mask of arrogance snapped back into place. "You think you can manipulate me?" he snarled. "I've built an empire by being smarter than everyone else. You're no different." Outside, the sound of the car grew louder, then stopped. Cinderella prayed it was Ethan. She had no way of knowing if he'd picked up on her cryptic message earlier, but the thought gave her strength. Donovan, oblivious to the potential rescue unfolding outside, reached into his pocket and pulled out the key to the door. "You're going to sit down, and we're going to figure this out like adults," he said, his tone dangerously low. Cinderella stayed rooted in place. "You can try to lock me away, but someone will come looking for me," she said. "You're not as untouchable as you think." A sudden knock at the door interrupted their standoff. Donovan froze, his expression shifting from anger to alarm. "Stay here," he commanded, his voice sharp as he moved toward the door. Cinderella's heart raced as he disappeared down the hall. The moment the door clicked shut behind him, she sprang into action. Grabbing a decorative vase from a nearby table, she tested its weight in her hands. If this was her chance to escape, she was going to take it. Donovan's footsteps echoed as he approached the front door. When he opened it, his expression twisted in confusion. Ethan stood on the doorstep, his face a mixture of determination and worry. "What are you doing here?" Donovan demanded, his voice laced with irritation. "I could ask you the same thing," Ethan replied, glancing past Donovan into the house. "Cinderella said she'd be here. Where is she?" Donovan hesitated, his mind racing for an excuse. "She's resting," he lied. "We've had a long discussion about a major project, and she needed a moment to herself." Ethan wasn't convinced. "I'll wait," he said, stepping forward as if daring Donovan to stop him. Inside, Cinderella heard the conversation growing heated. She knew she didn't have much time. With the vase in hand, she crept toward the door Donovan had locked earlier. Using all her strength, she slammed the vase against the lock. The noise was deafening, but it worked. The lock broke, and the door creaked open. She bolted down the hallway, her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. As she reached the entryway, she saw Donovan blocking Ethan's path. "Get out!" Donovan growled, shoving Ethan back. "Cinderella!" Ethan called, spotting her over Donovan's shoulder. Donovan turned just in time to see her rushing forward. "You're not going anywhere," he shouted, lunging toward her. But Cinderella was ready. Grabbing a nearby lamp, she swung it at Donovan, the impact sending him staggering backward. Ethan seized the opportunity, stepping between them to shield her. "She's leaving," Ethan said firmly. "And there's nothing you can do to stop her." Donovan's face turned red with fury, but he didn't dare move. Ethan ushered Cinderella outside, where the fresh air hit her like a wave of relief. Donovan's empire unraveled quickly after that night. Ethan had recorded their confrontation on his phone, capturing Donovan's threats and aggression. With Cinderella's testimony and evidence, authorities launched an investigation into Donovan's misconduct, uncovering a history of abuse and corruption that shocked everyone. Cinderella, once trapped in fear, emerged stronger than ever. She left her job and started a new career, this time on her terms. She became an advocate for workplace rights, using her experience to help others stand up against toxic power dynamics. As for Donovan, his fall from grace was swift and brutal. His company crumbled under the weight of the scandal, and he faced legal consequences that left him penniless and alone. It was the ultimate karmic justice for a man who had built his life on manipulation and control. Cinderella stood tall, her strength a beacon for others. She had faced her worst fears and emerged victorious, proving that even in the darkest moments, courage and resilience could light the way forward. If you love this story of courage and karma, don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And remember to subscribe for more powerful stories that inspire and empower. Let us know in the comments what was your favorite part of Cinderella's journey.